So I just want to start by, just in a way as a sort of a bit of background for the week, just talk a little bit about one way that we can understand how anxiety, how low mood can sort of snowball or can get worse, can exacerbate. There are all sorts of things that can cause low mood or anxiety in the first place. And I'm not really going to talk about that because mindfulness is really helpful for preventing things getting worse, or the sort of habits that make anxiety and low mood worse. So I just want to talk a little bit about that first of all. So I'll just take an example of say low mood. So I don't know if you can see this little tiny thing, this little thing here. This little thing we could say is just a little thought or feeling, a sort of slight low mood, or a little thought to do with low mood. Maybe there's just a little tiny bit of sadness, or a thought of just feeling a little bit lonely. And well, you're feeling a little lonely, maybe barely even notice it, but you know, it's quite a nice day. Certainly it is here in London, and you think, well, maybe I'll go for a walk in the park. We've got Victoria Park very close to here. And as you go into the park, you notice there are lots of people in the park sitting in little groups. And actually, that makes you feel a bit more lonely. So it's like you sort of drop into a bit more loneliness. And there's this sort of thought of, oh, this little thought comes along, oh, I'm really kind of by myself. Here I am all by myself. And sort of, I don't feel, you know, very, very good about that. And then maybe another little thought comes along that all these happy people, but I'm all by myself, and will I ever find a partner? And that sort of thought just descends on you, and you sort of drop into an even lower mood that comes. And with that even sort of lower mood, you start sort of thinking, oh yeah, life is really rubbish. It really feels grim. It's really, really bad. And that takes hold of you. And you fall into a still lower mood. And then that starts bringing up all sorts of other things about, you know, how my life just feels really rubbish. And you sort of drop into a lower mood, and you have thoughts to do with that, about how your life is just going nowhere. And you then have even more thoughts about how you just feel no good as a person, no hope about the future, and you fall into even worse mood. So this is, we could sort of say, this is sort of what happens with low mood, how it can just sort of build and escalate. I don't know if that's a sort of thing that any of you are familiar with. You could put a yes in the chat box if you recognize that. So that's the sort of thing that can happen, that sort of escalating process. But in a way, it's just the same, exactly the same sort of thing that can happen with anxiety. So we've got a yes from Sarah. So yeah, the same thing can happen with, oh, and yes from Angela, and oh yes, there's a few yeses coming in now. That's great. Okay, so yeah, so it's familiar. But let's just follow the anxiety example as well. So again, same sort of thing. Here's, you know, a little, you might have just a tiny little thought or a little feeling of anxiety. Maybe you've been off work. For a lot of us have been, you know, off work, either or working from home, or we're being furloughed, or maybe we don't have work. And then maybe one day we know that we're going back to work, and it's just a slight in the background, this sort of slight feeling or thought of anxiety about going back to work. And you know, particularly maybe if you're, you know, thinking, you know, for going back to work, you might think, oh, I've got to travel. And you start worrying about traveling. So, in London, you might be worried about going in the tube, or maybe it's going in on the bus. And that just makes you feel a little bit more anxious. And then, again, thinking about the tubes, you sort of think, oh gosh, that's going to be really hot and stuffy in the tubes, and oh, that's going to be really unpleasant. And you start feeling even more anxious about the thought of that. And then you sort of think about, oh, not only that, what happens if it's crowded and I've got to wear the mask, and I might get this feeling that I sometimes get when I'm anxious, that I can't breathe properly. And so you start feeling more anxious. And then you think, and what happens if the tube stops and I'm stuck in this place and I can't breathe? And then what happens if maybe I'll pass out? And you start to feel even more anxious. And then more and more thoughts come, I'll just make a complete fool of myself. I'm going to look like a real idiot. And how am I ever going to get over this? And you just get more and more anxious. So again, it can just spiral off in the same way. So again, similar sort of thing to the depression. We get this thing of how the thoughts and emotions, it's like they sort of come together and we get trapped by them. They're like getting trapped in this box. We get trapped by those sort of thoughts and emotions. So what can we do about that? Well, the mindful approach to this is to try and find a different place where we can, in a way, get a bit of space from some of those thoughts and emotions that just can take over our minds. So we need a different place. And what the mindfulness teaching suggests is that place that can be really helpful is the body. So we can pay attention to the sensations of the body to give us, in a way, another place from which we can observe, from which we can come into relationship with these difficult thoughts and feelings in a way that doesn't make them worse, in a way that doesn't perpetuate them. So we're not feeding this sort of snowball or this spiral of thoughts and emotions. So what we can pay attention to is sensations. So when I say sensations, what I mean by that is the actual feeling of sensations. I don't mean a thought about a sensation. So if I place my hand, and you might like to do this just now, place your hand on your face and just feel the sensations of your hand on your face. Just notice what that's like. So it's not a thought. You can even sort of move your hand slightly, and you can sort of feel, what that's like. You can feel the temperature. You can feel whether the skin is soft or whether it's hard. I can feel a bit of stubble on my face. Think, oh, maybe I should have shaved better this morning. So you can notice the thought goes off like that, but that's the thought. So you just notice that thoughts come off, because those thoughts will go off. But you just come back to, oh yeah, but what's it actually feel like? So feel that the sort of the roughness there, as opposed to the sort of slightly smoothness higher up in the cheek. Or you could just put your hand on the ground or a chair, something hard, and just again feel what that's like. So again, we're sort of noticing actual sensations, and not a thought about a sensation, but actual sensations. So maybe you can feel, I've got my hand on the mat now, and I can feel the temperature of that. I can feel it's very smooth. I can feel the texture of the material. It's a sort of cottony material. I can feel that's got just very slight little bumps here and there. So again, I can just feel all those sensations with my hand. So that's what I mean by feeling sensations. So what we're going to do is what we call a body scan, which I'll lead us through, in which we just try and notice sensations in different parts of the body. And this is going to be basically a building block that can help us work with states of low mood, of anxiety, by helping us to take us out of them and by helping us to stop feeding those thoughts and feelings. So what I'll do is I'll lead us through the body, through different parts of the body, and just try and notice whatever sensations are there. Now, you will find that your mind wanders off, and that's fine. We just notice the mind going off, and then we come back. The great thing about that is we start to notice the little subtle thoughts. Because I don't know if you remember how, I was saying all this began. I have to unpack my many little boxes here. I'm just going to unpack all my little boxes, which is a kind courtesy of Kusla Sari, who's lent me my visual aid for this week. So the little one that I started with, I can see the difference. So this is like anxiety, depression, low mood that's really strong that you can really notice. This is just this little tiny little seed of a thought that it can just sort of all start from. So we often miss those. However, if we're practicing mindfulness of body, we'll notice that our mind wanders off from time to time. And often it's just very trivial thoughts. But some of those trivial thoughts might be just these little guys that we'd be really good if we could catch them early rather than waiting until they build up into something like this. So, so we pay attention to the body, we notice where our mind goes when it goes off somewhere, and then we simply come back to the body so that we don't sort of we don't just keep those thoughts going, we just come back to the body. Now, it may be that some parts of the body, there are uncomfortable or difficult sensations. Now, with practice and time, even the most difficult sensations, we can start to learn to come into relationship to feel. But if you're newer to this sort of practice, then and you find somewhere in your body that's quite difficult, then don't push it too hard. Just notice, oh, there's something here that feels a bit uncomfortable. Maybe I don't want to get anywhere near. So you just make a note of that, and then maybe just pause there, and then move on to the next part of the body. So we can just take it, at our own timing, at our own level of comfort.